The work order was 4 pages long and written in the particular font of bureaucratic confidence, the kind that assumes nobody will read past the header. Mara Ellison read past the header. She was 26, 18 months into a junior archivist post at the Cabinet Office, and she had the specific curse of people who are good at their jobs too early. She noticed things that weren't her business to notice. Tonight's task was straightforward. Cross-reference the Q3 infrastructure audit bundle from the Department for Transport against the Cabinet Office Heritage Register. Flag discrepancies. File the report. Go home. She'd been through 42 documents without a single flag. The 43rd stopped her cold. It was buried mid-bundle, sandwiched between a pavement resurfacing order for Victoria Embankment and a lighting replacement schedule for St. James's Park. Nothing about its placement suggested it was different from either. It bore the same formatting, the same reference codes, the same cheerful administrative language that made the removal of things sound like the tidying of a drawer. Ref DFT/SW1A/0047. Site Horse Guards Parade Whitehall. Item classification street furniture heritage adjacent. Action demolition and replacement. Scope sentry enclosure structure north post. Scheduled Thursday 700 HRS. Contractor Severn Civil Works Limited. Mara read it again. Then she read the item classification again. Street furniture, heritage adjacent. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they are trying to locate the exact shape of something that feels wrong, but hasn't yet declared itself fully wrong. Then she pulled up the Cabinet Office Heritage Register and searched for Horse Guards, North Post, Sentry Enclosure. The register returned 4 different entries, each filed under a different name across different decades. None of them cross-referenced to each other, and not one of them marked with the DFT classification that would have made the work order legally clean. What the register did contain, buried in a 1987 supplementary notation, added by someone who clearly cared, and equally clearly had no authority to make it binding, was this: structure predates current Whitehall configuration. Believed original to 1745-1753 rebuilding of Horse Guards. Regimental significance unquantified but noted. Unquantified but noted. Mara closed the register, opened it again, and stared at those 3 words for longer than was strictly necessary. Then she picked up her phone and dialed the historic Royal Palace's advisory line, which she had never called before in her professional life and wasn't entirely sure she was authorized to call now. She reported the discrepancy in the careful, neutral language of someone who wants to be taken seriously and knows that certainty helps. She gave the reference number, the site, the scheduled date, and the item classification. She said, "I think someone has called a Sentry Box Street Furniture." Then she thanked them, hung up, logged the call in her own personal notebook, not the official system, and went back to the remaining 11 documents in her bundle. She never heard anything further about it. That was not the same as nothing happening. The call reached David Holt's contact, a man named Brennan who worked in liaison between the advisory board and the Ministry of Defense, at 9:47 that evening. Brennan was not a man given to alarm. He'd spent 16 years in regimental administration and had the emotional register of someone who had seen most things come and most things go, and had developed a considered view about which category each thing deserved. This one he put in neither category. He called Holt instead. Holt was 58, retired from active service with the Household Cavalry after 24 years, and currently attached to the historic Royal Palace's advisory board in a capacity that had no formal title and appeared on no organizational chart. He existed in the way that genuinely useful people sometimes exist within institutions, acknowledged by everyone who needed him, invisible to everyone who didn't. He answered on the second ring. Brennan read him the work order reference number and the item classification. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. Street furniture, Holt said. Street furniture, Brennan confirmed. Another silence, shorter. Thursday. Thursday. Holt said he'd handle it and ended the call. He pulled the work order from the fax Brennan had already sent. Because Brennan was the kind of man who sent faxes, had always sent faxes, and would continue to send faxes as a matter of philosophical conviction, and read it at his kitchen table under the overhead light with a cup of tea going cold beside his right hand. He underlined street furniture once, not angrily, the way a teacher underlines something that is going to need to be discussed. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the one with the small padlock he had never explained to anyone, and removed a worn leather document folio that had accompanied him to 3 countries and 2 decades of service. He checked its contents with the methodical patience of a man who already knew what was there, but believed in verifying anyway. Then he set his alarm for 5:30 and went to bed. The work order sat on his kitchen table all night, catching the pale orange of the streetlight through the curtain gap. 4 pages of administrative confidence that had no idea what was coming for it. Marsham Street in the morning has the particular energy of a building that takes itself seriously. The Department for Transport's infrastructure sub-office occupied the 4th floor, not the grandest floor, not the most prominent address in the building, but the floor where, over the course of 22 years, Gerald Fitch had quietly become the kind of person without whom the floor could not function. He knew where everything was filed. He knew which contractors were reliable and which submitted beautiful invoices for incomplete work. He knew the infrastructure renewal backlog the way a ship's navigator knows coastal charts, not because someone told him, but because he had learned it one piece at a time over 2 decades of careful attention. He arrived at 8:15, as he always did. Holt was already in the lobby at 8:12, reading a laminated fire safety notice with the focused expression of someone who had nothing better to do. He was wearing a plain charcoal overcoat and carrying the leather folio under one arm. No uniform, no insignia. The building's security desk had looked at his historic Royal Palace's advisory board identification card, found nothing on it to object to, and waved him through. He had told the receptionist on the 4th floor that he was there regarding reference DFT/SW1A/0047, a heritage liaison matter, and that he believed the responsible officer was Mr. Fitch. The receptionist had told him Mr. Fitch arrived at 8:15. Holt had said he was happy to wait. He waited with the absolute stillness of a man trained to stand motionless in public for hours at a time. When Fitch came through the door at 8:16, slightly early, because Fitch was the kind of man who arrived at 8:15 and considered that arriving at 8:16 was a Tuesday, Holt was standing beside the reception desk with the folio tucked under his arm and an expression of quiet patience that Fitch would later describe to his wife as unsettling, though I couldn't tell you exactly why. Gerald Fitch was 61, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the slightly compressed posture of someone who spent a great deal of time at a desk he had chosen himself and arranged precisely. He was not unkind. He was not unreasonable. He had, over the course of his career, successfully processed 4,219 infrastructure renewal items and had never once been told that any of them were wrong. He extended his hand to Holt with the professional warmth of a man who dealt with liaison visitors periodically and had a system for it. Holt shook it. "Mr. Fitch," he said, "I'm here about the Horse Guards work order." Fitch said, "Of course, come in." Fitch's office was orderly in the way that long tenures produce, not Spartan, but everything in a location that had been chosen and then confirmed by years of use. A photograph of the Humber Bridge on one wall, a small cactus on the windowsill that had clearly survived multiple budget cycles, a mug that said "Infrastructure Matters" in the font of a motivational poster and had probably been a gift from someone who meant it fondly. He sat across from Holt and opened his copy of the work order on the desk between them with the confidence of a man presenting solid ground. The structure in question, he said, fails current dimensional safety standards for pedestrian clearance on the eastern pavement approach. It predates the current pavement configuration by approximately 2 centuries and has never been brought into compliance. The reclassification to street furniture was necessary to bring it within the renewal program's scope. A replacement structure will be installed, same footprint, updated materials, fully compliant. He folded his hands. The original, he added, will be offered to the Museum of London. He said this last part with the slight additional warmth of someone who has anticipated an objection and prepared an answer that makes the objection unnecessary. Holt looked at the work order on the desk. Then he looked at Fitch. "How long has this been in the backlog?" he said. Fitch checked his notes. The original reclassification was filed in 2004. It's been in the renewal queue since 2011. The contractor slot became available this quarter. 19 years, Holt said. Administrative processes take time, Fitch replied, with the equanimity of a man who had made peace with that fact long ago. That doesn't make the outcome less correct. And here was the thing about Gerald Fitch that made him genuinely difficult to argue with. He was right. Within his system, with his definitions, using his classifications, the work order was entirely clean. The structure did fail the pavement standards. The reclassification was technically defensible. The Museum of London offer was actually rather thoughtful. Nothing in the 4 pages was procedurally wrong, which meant the argument couldn't be procedural. Holt opened the folio. He didn't produce a legal document first. He produced a photograph. Black and white, taken sometime in the early 1950s from the angle of the parade ground, horse guards in the background, the full ceremonial weight of the building pressing down through the frame, and in the foreground, barely occupying the lower left third of the image, the sentry box. A guardsman standing inside it, perfectly still, the kind of stillness that is not the absence of motion, but the presence of something deliberate. He placed it on the desk beside the work order without comment. Fitch looked at it, then at Holt. The structure, Holt said, was built between 1750 and 1753 as part of the William Kent redesign of the Horse Guards building. It is the last unfenced sentry post in London, the only one without railings, barriers, or perimeter separation from the public pavement. Every other ceremonial post in the city has been enclosed. This one has not been, by choice, and specifically by regimental choice, since the decision was taken in the 19th century that the guardsman inside it should be separated from the public by nothing except his own bearing. Fitch said nothing. The structure has no fence, Holt continued, because the regiment decided a fence would suggest the guardsman required protection. The guardsman is the protection. The box is not a shelter. It is a statement. He placed a second document beside the photograph, a typed regimental brief, dated 1962, outlining the sentry box's role in guardsman training, not as a physical post but as a philosophical one. The relevant section had been marked with a paper clip. The duty of the guardsman in the north box is not to guard the building. The building requires no guarding. His duty is to demonstrate continuity, that this post has been held, is held, and will be held. The box is the visible proof of that claim. Fitch read it. His reading glasses came off the chain. "I appreciate the history," he said carefully, "but appreciation doesn't resolve the compliance issue. The pavement clearance standard is 90 centimeters, Holt said. The current clearance is 83. It has been 83 centimeters since the pavement was resurfaced in 1987. The compliance gap is 7 centimeters and has existed without incident for 37 years. That doesn't make it compliant." "No," Holt agreed. "It makes it something that has been quietly managed for 37 years by people who understood what they were managing." Fitch sat back. The cactus on the windowsill caught a shaft of morning light and held it indifferently. "Mr. Holt," he said, with the tone of a man choosing his words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground. "I have a work order with a valid contractor booking, a clear scope of works, and a compliant replacement structure specified. I have a timeline and a budget line. What I do not have is a legal instrument that gives your advisory board authority over a DFT infrastructure renewal action." He was right about that too. "Not yet," Holt said. And then he told Fitch about the morning of July 1981. It wasn't in any document in the folio. Holt had it the way that certain things get carried, not filed, not archived, simply known by the people who needed to know it. Passed from one generation of the regiment to the next in the oral tradition that institutions maintain alongside their paperwork. In the summer of 1981, during a period of significant public disorder in London, a motorcycle backfired on Whitehall with enough force and at the right frequency to be indistinguishable in the first half-second from a gunshot. 3 people on the pavement near Horse Guards flinched, ducked, or moved sharply away from the source. A tourist from Ohio dropped his camera. 2 pigeons left a nearby ledge with considerable urgency. The guardsman in the north sentry box did not move. Not a fraction, not an adjustment of weight, not a tightening of the jaw that someone standing close might have noticed. He remained as he had been, eyes forward, boots planted, hands at rest, as if the world's brief moment of panic was a weather condition he had been briefed on in advance and found uninteresting. He was 22 years old. Afterwards, his commanding officer, a man not given to speeches, had asked him, in private, what he had been thinking in that half-second when everything around him moved and he did not. The guardsman had considered the question. "I thought," he said, "that if I moved, people would think they had something to be afraid of, and they didn't." That answer, not heroism, not training, but a considered act of public reassurance performed by a 22-year-old standing in a wooden box on a London pavement, had entered regimental memory and stayed there. It became, in the language of that specific institution, doctrine, not written doctrine, the other kind. The box is the reason he could make that choice, Holt told Fitch, not because it gave him cover, because it gave him position, a defined point, a place from which the statement could be made. You put a fence around it, you change what it means. You replace it, you sever the line. A new box made of compliant materials in the same footprint is not the same box. It is a very good replica of a statement. The statement itself is gone. The work order sat on the desk. Fitch looked at it for a long moment. "I understand what you're telling me," he said quietly, "but I cannot cancel a valid work order on the basis of a story." Holt nodded once. "No," he said, "but someone else can." He closed the folio, picked it up and stood. "I'll need until this afternoon," he said. Fitch looked at him. "The contractor mobilizes Thursday morning." "I'll need until this afternoon," Holt said again, with the identical inflection, and left. Colonel Richard Ashby received the call at 11:22. He was at his desk at Hyde Park Barracks, working through the morning's correspondence with the focused efficiency of a man who had learned that paperwork, left unattended, reproduces. He listened to Holt without interrupting. When Holt finished, Ashby asked one question. "The 1978 letter, is it still in the regimental archive?" Holt said he believed so. "Find out," Ashby said, and ended the call. The 1978 letter had been written by the then Home Secretary following a review of ceremonial infrastructure at royal and governmental sites. It was not a famous letter. It had not been widely circulated. It existed in the way that important things sometimes exist, quietly, in a folder, in a drawer, in a room that most people had no reason to enter. Its relevant paragraph read as follows. The sentry structures at Horse Guards Parade are acknowledged as falling under regimental custodianship by virtue of their continuous ceremonial use. Responsibility for their maintenance, preservation, and determination of fitness for purpose rests with the colonel of the household cavalry, not with civil infrastructure authorities. It had been signed by a home secretary, countersigned by the then colonel, filed in the regimental archive, and not looked at since 1994, when someone had checked its existence for an unrelated reason and put it back. It had never been rescinded, because no one had ever thought it needed to be. The archivist at Hyde Park Barracks found it in 40 minutes. It was photographed, scanned, and transmitted to Ashby's secure terminal. Ashby read it once, printed it, placed it in a manila envelope, put his coat on, and drove to Marsham Street. He arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon. He was not announced. He did not need to be. Gerald Fitch had spent the intervening hours in the focused discomfort of a man who has been given a reason to doubt something he was previously certain of and cannot yet determine whether the doubt is legitimate. He had pulled the original 2004 reclassification file. He had read the 1987 supplementary notation in the Heritage Register, significance unquantified but noted, and spent some time with the word unquantified. He had looked at the photograph Holt had left on his desk, which Holt had deliberately not taken with him. The guardsman in the photograph was perfectly still. Fitch knew, rationally, that this was because the photograph had been taken during normal duty, that the stillness was professional, not metaphysical, that reading significance into it was exactly the kind of reasoning that didn't belong in an infrastructure renewal program. He also knew that he had not been able to put the photograph face down. When Ashby entered the office, not shown in by a receptionist, not preceded by any of the usual institutional framing, simply present, in the way that certain people arrive, Fitch stood without quite deciding to stand. Old reflexes. Ashby was not in uniform, but he carried the quality of someone who didn't need to be. He was 63, gray at the temples, and had the unhurried deliberateness of a man who knew how rooms changed when he entered them and had stopped noticing. He placed the manila envelope on Fitch's desk, beside the work order, beside the photograph. "Mr. Fitch," he said, "Colonel Richard Ashby, Colonel of the Household Cavalry." Fitch said, "Colonel." Ashby opened the envelope and placed the letter on the desk with the same quality of motion that Holt had placed the photograph. Not presented, simply positioned, as if finding its correct location in the room. "Regimental custodianship," Ashby said, "established 1978. Never rescinded. Your work order is within DFT jurisdiction for street furniture and for heritage-adjacent structures under Civil Infrastructure Authority. It is not within DFT jurisdiction for a structure under regimental custodianship." He paused. "Those are two different categories. Your reclassification moved this structure into a category it does not legally occupy." Fitch's legal team would later confirm this in 3 paragraphs and a footnote. In the room, in the moment, Fitch read the letter twice and sat with it for a silence that lasted long enough to be a decision. "The work order," Ashby said, "will need to be withdrawn." "Yes," Fitch said, then after a moment, with the careful honesty of a man who felt it needed to be said, "I want you to know I wasn't trying to erase anything." Ashby looked at him. "I know," he said. "You were trying to bring a 7-centimeter pavement gap into compliance. That's your job." He picked up the 1978 letter and returned it to the envelope. "The problem is that some things are protected not by the systems built to protect them, but by the people who remember what they are. When those people aren't in the room, the systems see street furniture." He tucked the envelope under his arm. "Now someone is in the room." He nodded once at Fitch, acknowledged Holt with a look that contained an entire conversation, and left. The door closed with the soft finality of something that had been settled. The work order was withdrawn at 4:15 that afternoon. The administrative reclassification took 11 minutes. A heritage cross-reference notation added to the DFT record, a flag entered against the site reference in the Cabinet Office Register, a 3-line internal memo to the contractor standing down Thursday's mobilization. Severn Civil Works Limited issued a brief acknowledgement and rebilled for the aborted preparation costs, which were absorbed without comment. No press release was issued. No heritage listing was updated. The existing notations remained as they were, unharmonized, cross-filed under 4 different names. The 1987 supplementary entry still reading significance unquantified but noted, because changing them would have required a process that nobody had the appetite to begin, and which would have drawn attention to an episode that everyone involved had strong reasons to prefer remained quiet. The contractor's slot was reallocated to a pedestrian railing replacement on Millbank. The sentry box remained at Horse Guards,